It was an upscale bar. I probably should have called it a cocktail lounge, but it was a friendly place. When I struck up a casual conversation in the restroom with a guy who came in with some coworkers, he invited me to join their company. Great company. 4 guys and a couple of gals who had just left the office on a Friday afternoon. From what they said, it was their usual routine for Friday after work. The girls and 3 of the guys were married. The guy who invited me was divorced. From what he said, I gathered that he would linger longer than his work colleagues. They gave me a warm welcome, and we had a great time until the married ones got up to leave, leaving Phil and me. I told him I was in town on business and wouldn't be home until tomorrow afternoon. That's what I told him, and in a way it was true. I needed to unwind after Monday night's event, and I was quietly celebrating. My wife picked up the kids yesterday morning and went on a long-awaited trip to her parents. The kids were thrilled, although they wondered why I didn't go with them this time. They will be back home on Monday. After all that has happened, it will seem strange to some that Alice and I don't spend the weekend cuddled up together. On Tuesday, we spent the whole day snuggling, sniffling, and snuggling, and for the rest of the week we just hung on each other. Except for my meetings with the other members of the future support group, and we decided we needed a day or two to just think and get our heads together. Yeah, I did a little whining too. And if you think that makes me less of a man, go to hell. And I'll be glad if something comes of it too. I, on the other hand, decided that I needed to celebrate in silence and decided that the only safe way was to get away from the small town I was living in to some big place where I could blow off some steam. Don't get me wrong, no women for this, Daddy, but I needed to blow off some steam. Just as they say, to look on the bright side of things. Phil told me he wasn't going to head to his apartment until after dinner and suggested I join him. It sounded like a good deal. We ate at a restaurant adjacent to the living room we were in, and he was very nice. Then he took me to a small jazz club where we had a few more drinks, and apparently I got too mellow. It was okay. He didn't know me and had no idea where I was from. Hey, Phil, I'm celebrating today, I told him. If you'll listen to my story, I'll pay the bill at the club. God. Sometimes I wish I could keep my mouth shut. That little thing cost me a couple $100. Next time, before I open my mouth, I'll see how much they charge for drinks and cover charge. He threw me a perplexed look and nodded in agreement. Is that a single malt or 4 roses? He asked. Well, order the scotch if that's what you want to drink, I told him. It's a pretty good story and it's coming to an end, but it looks like it's going to have a happy ending. Judge for yourself, okay? With those words, I proceeded to tell the story. It all started a few weeks ago on a Tuesday. At breakfast, I noticed that Alice had become very gaunt. She moved stiffly and acted like she was in pain. I asked her what was wrong. She replied that she must have slept badly and she would be fine. I continued working without thinking about anything else until I called her at lunchtime to see how she was feeling. She answered the phone angrily, something along the lines of, "What do you need now?" She stopped me for a moment, and when I said hi, she shrieked in surprise and stumbled over to apologize. She explained that she thought I was a telemarketer. She told me it was okay and that she liked me. She was much more affectionate than usual. As I hung up the phone, I wondered. She had been out with the girls on Monday. They had gathered for cards and wouldn't be home until late. They were real players. Some of them played tournament bridge, and those games meant a lot to them. That morning, she walked until almost 2 o'clock, much later than usual, even for a bridge night. After thinking about it some more, I remembered that the same thing had happened the week before. It was then that I realized that she hadn't been listening to me talk about last night's game that morning. I usually listened with one ear, the same ear she used when I talked about my golf game. But I was still curious because I was interested in her and she hadn't said a word about it this morning. That's very unusual. And last Tuesday, she woke up grumpy and moving around like she was in pain. I wrote it off as a coincidence and went back to work. That night, I waited for her to tell me about the tricks she'd come up with, the silly bets her partner had made, who she was paired with, and so on. She didn't utter a word. I asked her how the game went, and she just said it was pretty good, as usual. It wasn't normal at all. On the way home Wednesday, I stopped to pick up some groceries that Alice had asked me to pick up. At the market, I ran into Faye, a casual acquaintance of mine, but one of Alice's favorite Monday partners. I was entering the store and she was coming out, and we hardly slowed down as we passed each other. She said, "Hi, tell Alice I missed her on Monday, and I hope she can make it next week." I managed to take a couple steps into the store before her words reached me, and when I turned around, she was already sitting in her car. That got me thinking. Something was going on, and it didn't seem to be good. We'd been married for a dozen years, and in all that time, I'd never once doubted her. Suddenly, I was seriously worried about my marriage and my family. This wasn't like my Alice at all. The sudden doubts made me feel like I was in a fog, too. All I had was a couple of coincidences and a random comment. Maybe it was Faye who had gone missing on Monday? Nevertheless, I decided I'd better figure it out. If I don't, it's going to bug me, and I'm going to be jealous and doubt my best friend. I had never been jealous before, and it would put a sour odor on our relationship. At the same time, I couldn't bring myself to tell my beloved that I doubted her. It was too ridiculous to be true, and she would either get angry or find it hilarious or both. And I didn't want to give her something to think about. And that's exactly what I'm going to start thinking about if I don't clear the air. I'm not too impressive looking, and I wondered how I would act if I found out my Alice was having an affair. Of course, it wouldn't make sense for me to get up to my full height, 5 feet 7 inches and 180 pounds, bald head and all. It would make me giggle, and I'd be the one going up. So that's something to think about, too. If anything was happening, it was on Monday evenings when I was watching the kids and she was supposed to be in bridge. I did a lot of thinking and planning that weekend. By Monday morning, I decided I had envisioned every possible scenario. That Monday, I called Alice and told her I had a lot of work to do. She said she would call our regular babysitter so I wouldn't be disturbed. The babysitter was supposed to arrive just before Alice left, which would allow me to suddenly remember that I needed to pick up something from the office, and the kids would still be looked after. I left about 45 minutes before Alice usually left. I just drove to the mall where I parked my rental car at Rent-A-Wreck. She had to drive past the mall on her way out of our little community, so I just waited for Alice to drive by in her Volvo station wagon. When she drove by, I pulled in a safe distance behind her. Almost immediately, I realized that she wasn't going to play bridge. They were supposed to play tonight just a half-mile from the mall. Instead, she drove out of our little community, and I followed her to a small house in a questionable neighborhood just over 7 miles away. She parked in the driveway, and after sitting in the car for a while, she got out and walked to a side door that I could see from my seat. She stopped on the porch, buried her face in her hands for a moment, squared her shoulders, opened the door, and walked in. From where I was sitting, I could see the window, and I watched my wife's shadow as she stopped in front of the window. The shadow was draped, but where she stood, the light was behind her. As I watched her shadow, it looked like she was taking off her clothes. When she turned out the light, I figured she was going either into the living room or the bedroom. But it didn't make much difference. An attractive naked woman is a useful piece of jewelry wherever she goes. Emotions I hadn't realized I had came over me with renewed vigor. For a moment, I was sure I was going to throw up my lunch, but managed to restrain myself. I had already turned off the overhead lights in the car, so when I opened the door, nothing caught my eye. Made sure I had all my accoutrements strapped into my fanny pack. That kit included brass knuckles, a bottle of muscle relaxant I'd managed to get my hands on, pepper spray, and a couple other things I thought could probably come in handy. I headed for the side door. It was still unlocked and opened into the utility room next to the kitchen. The dark clothes I was wearing practically hid me from view, and the soft-soled shoes made no sound as I stepped onto the porch and opened the door. As I stepped inside, I heard a deep male voice say, "Hey, bitch, where the hell is my Dago?" I heard the meaty thump of a hand or fist on flesh. "Now go to the kitchen and fetch it." I saw a bottle of red wine standing on the counter, already open. I sprinted over to it, uncorking the Maya relaxant as I went, and poured some. I hoped it would be enough, but I didn't care if it was too much. At least, not right now. Silently walking back to the back room, I waited until the door to the kitchen was almost closed. It turned out I didn't need to hurry. I was already in the pantry when I heard my wife whimper, then cry out in pain again. After a thump that sounded like someone had fallen to the floor, I heard her wheezing her way into the kitchen. Bitch, wipe your face. I don't like snotty ones. Clean yourself up when you get back here. You won't be dealing with that sissy husband today, came a male voice. My naked Alice walked into the kitchen, turning on the light. She was rubbing her breasts, on which a large red spot stood out, as if someone had hit her. Taking the wine, she looked at the cabinets for a moment, opened one, closed it, then opened the other, and took out 2 glasses. Stepping out of the kitchen, she turned off the lights. This was moderately good news. She hadn't been here often enough to know where things were kept in the kitchen. I knew my Alice. If she was here regularly, she would be very familiar with the layout of the kitchen. She seemed to study it whenever she visited an unfamiliar house. And I knew she didn't like pain. I'd bet good money she wasn't here of her own free will. And everyone knows I never bet less than a sure thing. Now all we had to do was wait for the relaxant to kick in. And that's not going to be easy, just sitting around waiting. Let me explain what a muscle relaxant is. In some medical procedures, medics need the patient to be completely relaxed, and they have several drugs that do that. It doesn't mean that the person can't use their muscles, but those muscles will be as weak as a kitten. Don't ask me how I got them. I won't tell you. Sitting there was a living hell. I could hear the goon berating Alice and a few spankings. This guy loved pain, loved to inflict it, not take it. I was sure of it. But the hardest part was listening to the muffled sounds of him doing things to Alice and ordering her to do things to him. Finally, I stood up and headed out of the kitchen towards the voice. The waiting was not helping my mood, and everything I looked at seemed to have a red tinge to it. As I reached the end of the hallway and the half-open door, I heard Alice whimpering and whispering. I cursed silently, pulling on the gloves I had brought with me just in case. "Please, please, please let me go. I haven't done anything to you. Please, I have a family. Don't do this. God, I'm going crazy with this." There was the sound of another slap, then the voice. "Shut up, bitch. You're on your knees right now for a very good reason. I have no reason to be a good guy if you don't do your part, slut. Now get started." I looked into the room, and there was my wife, kneeling in front of this huge monster of a man. Heck, he must have weighed maybe 300 pounds. Ugly as sin, with a face riddled with scars. His underpants and shorts were down to his ankles, and he was pouring wine into a glass he held in his hand. The bottle was already half empty. There was a second glass on the bedside table, which looked clean from where I was sitting. I assumed that Alice hadn't been given a drop of wine to drink. The mountain man drank half a bottle in 30 minutes. The guy I'd gotten the relaxant from told me it was usually administered intravenously, and it took less than 60 seconds to take effect. But it can also be administered orally. When administered orally, it takes 20 minutes to take effect. It's faster if alcohol has been consumed. It's been a little over half an hour since Alice brought the wine. Apparently, he hadn't stopped drinking since then. He was damn sure he'd had enough to make the medicine work. For a few seconds, I wondered if he might have overdosed. Then I shrugged it off. At this rate, I might have a problem if I didn't try to kill him with my bare hands. I hoped I was right, because I couldn't take any more of this asshole abusing my wife. I pushed open the door and stepped into the room. The bastard's eyes got big, and he rose to his feet. He let go of her head, and she fell on her side, coughing and spitting up. The bastard had to be 6 feet 5 inches if he was an inch tall. He growled loudly and stepped forward to hit me. Unfortunately for him, he forgot his pants were around his ankles. He somersaulted forward and landed on his nose. It was nice to see that he didn't have time to pick himself up with his arms as he fell. They seemed to collapse under his weight as he landed. I looked down at him and grinned. "Get up, asshole! Mommy's little fatty is afraid to stand up to a man?" The guy's eyes got even bigger as blood rushed from his nose. I guess my behavior only surprised him because he was a foot taller and 150 pounds heavier than me. Hell, maybe even more. Maybe he was over 200 pounds. He was huge. He started to struggle to get to his feet, and I told him that if he wanted to take his pants off, just let him go ahead and do it. I would let him. If he doesn't want to, I'll take them off for him. He tried to pull them up, but they were so tangled they wouldn't budge, so he did as I said. He pushed and pushed them until they were on his feet, taking his shoes with them. It looked like real work to him, so the relaxant must have worked. When he got to his feet, I put one of the brass knuckles on his right hand. Then I walked right up to him and jumped on his heels. I landed on the edge of his heel and he shrieked. Damn it, that had to have hurt. Then I piled all my considerable weight on his shoulder, trying to lift him off the ground with my fist. I actually lifted him onto his toes. But it was the muscle relaxant that helped the most. His abdominal muscles relaxed too, and my fist just slammed into his belly. It felt like my hand went deeper into his belly than my wrist. The air rushed out of him and he flopped backwards, landing on the bed. Then the wine spilled out of him. Without waiting for him, I stepped forward and started pounding him over the head with my fists. With my heavy gloved hands, I tried to land as many blows on his temples as possible. Alternatively, I aimed for his throat. My goal was to make him pass out without breaking my hands on his head in the process. The asshole was just pawing at me. He probably thought he was throwing punches, but he had no more strength than a kitten. I'm sure he had no idea why he couldn't hurt me. It couldn't have happened to him before. About 10 minutes passed, and he gave up. He started crying, fell on the bed, and curled up in a ball, trying to cover his head with his hands. I turned to Alice, who was sitting on the floor looking at me with her mouth open. "See if Shit for Brains has any ties in his closet, girl. Bring them to me." She just stared at me for a minute before I barked at her, "Now!" She jumped up and ran to the closet. Grabbing a handful off the rack, she hurried toward me. Grabbing the SFB's far arm, I yanked on it, flipping him over onto his stomach, then wrapped the tie around it and tied it tightly. Jumping onto the bed, I pulled back his other arm and fastened the tie around it. I then tied his hands together behind his back. Dropping to the floor, I told him to get on the bed. He just looked at me over his shoulder. Reaching down, I pulled the sock off his foot and then clamped his nose. When he opened his mouth to take a breath, I stuck the sock in it. "Now you know what I mean, Shit for Brains, when I tell you to stick a sock up there." And I laughed at him. The joke wasn't too funny, but that was the situation for me. My anger and hatred for the thing threatened to overwhelm me. I stopped for a moment and took a couple deep breaths. I didn't care what happened to him, but my kids needed their father, and Alice would need me after I got her home. My family couldn't let me lose control of myself. Pinching his nose and clamping my hand over his mouth to keep the dirty sock in it, I asked him to lie down on the bed again. By now he was sobbing real tears, choking and unable to take a real breath. The inability to breathe had knocked the last vestiges of struggle out of him. He made his way to the middle of the bed where I forced him to his knees, resting his head on the pillow. I then placed several pillows under his stomach before I began whipping his ass with a belt I had taken off his pants. It was a pleasant 10 minutes of beating before I got out of the nasty noose I was in. Every time I started to stop, I remembered Alice holding onto the chest where the son of a bitch had hit her. When I stopped, his ass was bright red, already purple in places. Blood was oozing from other places. Untying his hands, I pulled each one up to the post at the headboard of the bed and secured them there. After some getting used to it, it was not apparent that his hands were bound. It seemed like he was holding on to the bed. As I stepped back and studied the bedroom, I saw a video camera on the dresser next to a digital camera. In one corner stood a computer. I asked Alice if he was filming her. She hid her face in her palms and nodded affirmatively. I told her not to worry about it now, that we would discuss it later. Ideas began to form in my head. I told Alice to go to the kitchen, get dressed, and when she returned to the bedroom, to bring carrots, cucumbers, or other long vegetables with her. While she was gone, I booted up the computer and started looking for floppy disks and zip disks. There weren't many, but I started a complete formatting of every floppy disk I found and threw them in the trash when each one was completely reformatted. By the time Alice returned, I had formatted all the floppy disks. She looked much more comfortable in her clothes, and the look of hatred she directed at Shit for Brains was classic. She handed me a bundle of carrots, a couple zucchini, and 2 cucumbers. After asking Alice to start reformatting the 5 zip drives she found, I began an inventory of what I had in the bedroom. Now I'm not a homosexual. As the saying goes, I have nothing against that lifestyle as long as they keep it away from me. If you like having fun with some guy, that's your business. I have something else entirely that lights my fire. Very hot. But what I saw at SFB's house, he may have been a real homophobe. A lot of those big, rough men were like that. I always assumed they were disturbed because maybe they had done some experimentation in their youth and were afraid deep down that they were gay. Hell, I've read that almost every guy experimented with loving another guy when he was just learning how his own plumbing worked. No big deal. Girls are hard to find when a guy has just entered puberty. Judging by the way he treated my gentle wife, he was probably bragging very loudly about how much he hated those fucking quirks. Given his size and temperament, I guessed he might be aggressive as well. I'd be surprised if he didn't pick fights with men he only suspected of being gay. Heck, I knew a couple of professional soccer players and one wrestler who would be willing to ask to discuss their problem with him. I found a pair of scissors in the bureau drawer and used them to cut shit for Brain's shirt. He was now naked to the point of nausea. It was truly an unappetizing sight. I wanted to save my wife, but now I felt really sorry for her. It was out of the question that she would willingly end up with this slug. Calling Alice over, I handed her a video camera and told her that she was now the family cameraman. She was to take some very nice shots, with as many good shots of SFB's face as possible. She was to make sure that my face did not appear in any of the shots. With those words, I stripped off my clothes. What I wanted to do, I might not be able to do. SFB was lying on the bed, on his stomach, and with his big ass sticking up. I took the biggest carrot I could find and just shoved it up his ass. He howled and tried to get up, but the relaxant had already taken effect. He couldn't even pull his knees up under him. I clamped his nostrils again and then told him to shut up if he wanted to breathe. Taking the sock he spit out, I added a sock from the other foot and stuffed them in his mouth again. After wiggling the carrot back and forth and then a little in and out, I told him that it was okay to cause pain, just don't make any noise while doing it. At the same time, SFB seemed to relax a bit. I guessed that his bowels were opening up little by little. Then I switched to a zucchini that was a little larger in size. This seemed to get his attention again. While I was at it, Alice was videotaping the feast. Every now and then she would set the camera aside, take one zip disk out of the computer, and insert another. She had just finished setting up the camera and shooting a close-up when she informed me that all the zip disks had been reformatted. One close-up is worth describing, and it was Alice's idea. She turned SFB's face sideways to get it in the frame and made sure his mouth was completely covered. She didn't want his socks visible. Then she stood behind him and got a great shot. SFB was sobbing like a baby. When the video shoot was over, I asked Alice if she wanted to play with the cucumber while I finished with the computer. She literally jumped at the idea. While she was having fun, I proceeded to completely reformat the hard drive. When I left, it would be able to boot it up, but no more than that. Once the formatting was complete, I started the computer on a loop, endlessly copying the number 8 to the hard drive. Taking the carrot that started his ass whipping, I knelt down next to SFB's face and pulled the socks out of his mouth. Before he could say anything, I shoved a couple inches of the brown-spotted carrot into his mouth and told him to start eating. He seemed reluctant until I reminded him that breathing was much more comfortable than not breathing. Reluctantly, he began to chew. His face was classic, but by the time he had finished both the carrot and the zucchini, you couldn't tell from his face that he really didn't want to eat contaminated food. Leaving Alice to guard the SFB, I looked around the house for anything that might embarrass Alice. The only thing I found was a notebook, which I put in my pocket. Since I wanted to do a thorough search, the house was turned upside down before I was even done. I could easily look around and notice anything that still needed to be sorted out. Giving Alice the videotape, I sent her home. She was given explicit orders to drive carefully, and I made sure she knew I still loved her. After disabling the only phone in the place, I broke his car keys into 2 pieces. Then I gathered all of his clothes I could find. After tying his ankles and wetting the knots with water, I untied SFB's hands and left him on the bed. I did a few other little shenanigans, like unplugging the water heater and leaving hot water in the kitchen sink and taking the float out of the toilet tank. Just little sneaky things that I'm not too proud of now, but I really like to think about them when I did them. After informing the pile of lard about the tape and warning him how widely I could distribute it if he bothered me or Alice again, I left, taking all the formatted zip drives and floppy disks with me. On the way home, I left a roll of SFB clothing at the Salvation Army drop-off point. No. Oh yes, you might want to know about the address book. It was quite a nice piece of work. It didn't have many names in it, but some were quite interesting. There were 7 names under the letter C. Alice's name was listed penultimate. All of the names were female, none of them started with an S, neither the first nor the last. And they all had little symbols next to them. I called the first of them at 9:30 the next morning, and a very timid female voice came on the line. I introduced myself and asked if she knew the person by name. The poor woman suppressed a sob and replied, "Yes." Speaking softly, trying to reassure her, I asked if she would like to not hear from. She asked what she should do. I told her she didn't have to do anything, but if he called her again for her to tell him that she had a videotape that she was going to make public if he bothered her again, she should have refused any demands. If she wants details, I would be happy to meet her at a restaurant of her choice. In a trembling voice, she named Denny's restaurant located near my house, and I made an appointment for her that evening. I met with her and separately met with all but one of the other women listed in the book as S. One phone was disconnected. In each case, I told the woman that I had discussed the relationship, and if the man contacted them again to tell them that his veggie chef had told them not to let SFB contact them again. If he does, the chef will see that the SFB demo video has gone out in a big way, and a full copy will be sent out to everyone in his address book. When I told them they were free from his harassment, each of the women cried. All of the women were attractive. All were wearing wedding rings. They all looked like soccer moms to me. I didn't allow any of them to tell me how they had fallen into SFB's hands, but gave each of them permission to let me tell the other women on the list that they would like to talk to those who had fallen into his clutches. All of them, including Alice, gave me permission to do so. My wife talked to several of them and told me that they would be holding a meeting at our house in 2 weeks. She plans to send the kids to their grandparents that night, but asked me to stay home. I am instructed to stay in my room unless she comes to get me. Alice thinks the women will want to meet me. If any of them do not want to do so, I must be sure I have a good book in my den. She tells me it could be a long night. Something about forming a survival group to support each other. Oh, you probably want to know what Alice did to get herself into this mess. I'll be damned if I know. I love that woman, and I know she loves me. I'm not going to question her. And she started to tell me when I got home, but I wouldn't let her. However she got into this situation, it wasn't something that there was no rational and normal explanation for. I suppose she might insist on telling me about it sometime in the future, but I don't care at all what it was. And you know what? I'm willing to bet everything I have that she'll never get into a mess like that again. In a way, I really am making that bet. Like I said, I never bet except on the right things.